Hello everybody. Welcome to this second dialogue on future urbanism, which is hosted by me, Dan Hill, from Melbourne School of Design at the University of Melbourne, and my colleague Yuichiro Takeuchi at Sony CSL Kyoto. Say hello, Yuichiro.
Hello.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's fine.
And we'll quickly do introductions in a moment to the other people on the call. But just to frame this briefly, this is the second in a series of 3 discussions that Yuichiro and I have organized between the University of Melbourne and Sony Computer Science Labs. We hope to build some research collaborations out of this, but we're taking perhaps a slightly unusual way of doing that, and that's having a discussion, recording it, seeing if we can find some crossovers of threads that we want to tie together into research collaborations, and then thinking through what they might be. But we're going to start with just basically, can we find people that have something interesting to say to each other around these ideas of future cities and future urbanism, the role of technology and citizens and places coming together. Out of that, we think there will be some research collaborations, but no pressure. Yeah, because if all that happens, if we have a good chat for 90 minutes, then that's also good, because I think we have interesting things to say to each other, I hope. So before we get any further, just to say in Australia, we often or almost always start any meeting with an acknowledgement of country. And that's acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we're gathering here today in Melbourne, which is the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people, at least here on the Melbourne University campus where it's located. And I'd like to pay my respects to any elders, past, present, and emerging, and to thank them and recognize their work in terms of caring for country for many thousands of years. The format for today is that we'll quickly do introductions shortly, and then we'll head through, Yuichiro and I will do quite rapid speeches, really, well, as rapid as we ever are, which is not that rapid, frankly, in my case. And then we'll throw to Majid, and then Daisuke, and then Crystal, and then we'll have a discussion for about half an hour or so towards the end. I'll take some notes, and I suggest that if possible, if we save questions to the end for the discussion, that will enable us to kind of move more fluidly. So if you hear someone say something interesting, then jot it down in a book or remember it, and then we'll come back to it at the end, if that's all right. Just to explain why Crystal and I are sitting in a room with a shoji screen in the background. We're in this Japanese room and garden at Melbourne School of Design, which is designed by Professor Shigeru Yura. It's sort of a Japanese room in that it's really a kind of an Australian room with many Japanese influences in it. And you can probably see some of them there, and it leads out to a garden, which is behind us. One day we'll welcome you to the campus. It'll be great to have people from Kyoto and Tokyo here, even if it is slightly strange to take Japanese people to a Japanese room. But that's, if you're wondering why we have this, that's why. We also have this long-standing connection between Australia and Japan. We're roughly the same time zone, and we have lots of shared interests and challenges as well together. And so just we'd love to see if we can build some meaningful collaborations out of this shared knowledge exchange. So that's enough from me. Can I suggest we do some quick introductions? Maybe not you, Yuichiro, because I'll come to you in a moment, and you can do a proper introduction to your work as well. But Majid, would you like to say hi and say a little bit about who you are?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Majid Sarvi. I'm a chair in transport technology and professor of transport engineering in the School of Engineering and Information Technology. My background is pretty much transportation, network management, smart city from the lens of transport. I've been working in this area for almost 18 years. Very delighted to be here. I also did my PhD in Tokyo University back in 2002. So I know a little bit about Japan, and we're delighted to be here and participate in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Majid. Daisuke?
Hello, my name is Daisuke. I'm working in Sony CSL OXS project, which is a project to develop a renewable energy system. And my background is electrical engineering. In the past, I was working in the laptop PC and making a electrical circuit or something. And now from 2013 or 14, I joined CSL and working to build a microgrid system. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Welcome. And Crystal.
Hi, everyone. Crystal Legacy, Associate Professor in Urban Planning. I am also Program Coordinator of the Masters of Urban Planning and Deputy Director, Co-Director now, actually, of the Informal Urbanism Research Hub. So my research looks at the intersection of transport planning and public participation, which of course I'll speak more to later on.
Thanks, Crystal. And Kotaro.
Yeah. Hi, this is Kotaro Jinushi from Sony's Computer Science Laboratory, working with Daisuke. And unfortunately, I'm from the business side. So I used to work for the business planning or business development for the energy system for 4 years. And before that, I worked around a lot of division inside Sony. And now I'm work for a local city in Tokushima as well in terms of decarbonization. And also in this sense, transportation or electrification will be one key. So I'm interested in what kind of discussion we will have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you and welcome. Okay, Yuichiro, I'd like to pass over to you to introduce yourself, of course, and help us frame the workshop.
So hello everyone, I'm Yuichiro Takeuchi, Sony CSL Kyoto, research at Sony CSL Kyoto, and I'm joining from this nice little tea room that we have in CSL, we have in the lab, and maybe I can show you around a little bit. Like it's an authentic, it's actually an authentic tea room with like an authentic looking scroll and I don't know, this like a kettle thing over here. I don't know how you call it in English, but you have this like a place to boil water, and so this is a really like an authentic tea room where you can have actual like tea ceremonies, and we happen to have this inside the lab. And but anyway, so thank you all for joining. It's really a great honor to be a part of this, and I want to keep this brief. But I thought I would like briefly describe like things like who we are and who I am and what I expect from a workshop and things like that. And so today we have 3 participants from Sony, and I don't know how much you guys know about Sony, but Sony is a company that was founded in 1946. And it's a startup, and so it's like it was started by just a bunch of people who wanted to like start something new after the World War II in 1946. And at first, we were a very small company. In the first year, we had like 20 employees, but now we've grown to over 100,000 employees in worldwide in total. So we've become this very large multinational company. And so the small pictures on the right side of the slide, these are like examples of products that Sony has sold over the years. And over the years, we've sold like tape recorders and like radio, TV, video cameras, video games, consoles, and so on. And I think if you look back at the history of Sony, we're not a company that has been selling the same thing throughout its history. We've been like constantly entering new markets and we're constantly launching new product divisions. And so that sense of like constant change, I think, is something that characterizes Sony as a company. And we belong to, all 3 of us belong to a division called Sony CSL. And CSL is short for Computer Science Lab, and it's an R&D division that was founded in 1988. And at first, we only had the Tokyo office, but now we have 4 branches in total, 2 in Japan and 2 in Europe. And we often joke inside the lab that we have this unofficial policy that we only launch branches in cities with great food. So, the latest edition is Rome, so you have this like excellent culinary tradition. And so from the beginning, we've had this very like freewheeling culture. So when you join Sony CSL, you're not really assigned to any like existing project. You're like you have the choice to come up with your own research topic, and we don't have this obligation to contribute to Sony's existing business like divisions, like I don't know, like you're not forced to like come up with something that contributes to PlayStation or something like that. So now we have 4 branches that are full of people who are doing their own thing. And I think the fact that we research lab like Sony CSL is allowed to exist within Sony's corporate structure, I think is a reflection of the fact that, as mentioned earlier, Sony is a company that constantly changes like entries to markets. So I think as a company, Sony feels the need to, in addition to doing research that directly contributes to Sony's existing business, we also have to do research that kind of explores what lies outside of Sony's, what Sony is currently known for. And so I work in the Kyoto branch of Sony CSL, and my background is in computer science, but I got my PhD from the University of Tokyo, just like Majid. But after I got my PhD, I also went to Harvard's Graduate School of Design to get a master's degree, and which is a GSD. Harvard GSD is like it's a school of architecture and urban planning. So from the beginning, I've been interested in this this interdisciplinary domain, like across computer science and the intersection between computer science, architecture, and urban design. And at CSL, I'm currently leading this project called the Wikitopia project, which is it's an interdisciplinary research whose goal is to realize future cities that can be edited like Wikipedia, the online encyclopedia. So in Wikipedia, if you find any issues with, you're browsing Wikipedia and you find some issues, like, for example, maybe a scientific team found a new species of birds in the Amazon rainforest or something, but there's no article for the bird. You can actually write your own article for the bird, right, by referring to like academic articles or news articles. And in the same way, we're imagining this future city where you find something wrong with the city, some problem with the city, you can actually fix the problem yourself or in collaboration with other fellow citizens. And so we're trying to kind of bring this like a democratic mode of production that you see in the online world to real world physical design, urban design. And when I put it this way, it might sound very futuristic, but in reality, this kind of DIY or citizen-led urban design is something that already exists in various forms around the world. And these pictures, I show these all the time, but the picture on the left is something like Parklet in San Francisco. You can see that these are like small roadside parks, and like a small chunk of this roadside parking spaces is converted into this small park. And I think what's interesting about this small park is that it's not built by the city, it's actually built by citizens. So the citizens submit this proposal that we want to build a park at this location. This is the design, and this is how we will go get the funding. This is how we maintain the park. And you submit this proposal, and when and if the proposal is accepted by the city, you get permission. The city doesn't give you any like money or funding or personnel, but you get permission to build and maintain park. And there are many other examples like guerrilla gardening, which is like converting open vacant lots to gardens. And there are a lot of like DIY efforts related to like bike lane and bike culture as well. So there are many examples of this kind of DIY urbanism. And what we're trying to do within the Wikitopia project is we're like exploring how we can use technology, like new technology to like facilitate this kind of practice. So we're asking questions such as, can we use technology to lower the hurdles, like psychological hurdles towards citizen participation? Or can we like use technology to increase the scale and the variety of artifacts that can be built by citizens? Or maybe like, can we use technology to resolve conflicts and reach consensus, and so on? And so I want to keep this short, and so I'm not going to like explain everything that we do. But for example, we are like developing this like 3D printing technology. So we found that by using a specialized polymer and printing a fine 3D mesh structure, we can print something that acts as a substitute for soil. So you can plant like seeds on top of the printed volume, and if you add water and light, it'll like eventually the plants, the seeds will sprout, and you have this lush vegetation. And building on that finding, we are trying to create this pipeline where users can design like freeform gardens with various shapes on a PC, and define the layout of the plants, and the printer will print out this whole garden. And so we're hoping that this kind of technology will make urban gardening more accessible and appealing, attractive to to citizens. And we're also designing building this social networks that's exclusively focused on urbanism. And so it's a very simple platform where people can share like whatever they caught their interest in the city, whatever like something they find interesting or something they found like I don't know, abhorrent or like a good or bad in the city. And I don't know how many of you know this website called iNaturalist, but if you know the website, it's iNaturalist is a website where people can upload wildlife sightings, so sightings of wild animals or like birds or insects. And what we're trying to create is something like the iNaturalist, but for urbanism. So where people can like upload their opinions about like their neighborhoods. And we're I have to keep this short, right? So we're also doing a lot of work on augmented reality, especially like urban augmented reality. So how can we provide high quality augmented reality, not in like closed spaces where you can install a bunch of sensors and whatnot, but in open outdoor spaces. And also we're doing a lot of work on IoT, like the devices that you can embed within the built environment. And in addition to technical research, we do put a lot of effort on outreach as well. So we, in the past, we've held like design competitions and we published our own manifesto booklet as well. So that's my work in a nutshell. And my hope for this workshop series is like, well, as Dan mentioned, if this turns out to be just a nice little chat, that's okay as well. But hopefully this will like kickstart some long-term collaboration between Sony and the University of Melbourne. And it'll lead to some kind of a large-scale collaboration about 21st century urbanism. And that was supposed to be the end of my talk, but actually at the last minute, I added some slides, several slides, and because I wanted to like, I thought maybe I should say something about today's discussion topic, something relevant to today's topic. Like, so I guess today we will be hearing a lot about smart grids and smart traffic and like smart infrastructure. So I was thinking, like, I was wondering if I have anything interesting or intelligent to say about infrastructure, but actually I don't. I figure that I don't have anything to say because I work in like DIY urbanism. DIY urbanism tend to focus on small scales, like this massive scale, like infrastructure scale that is completely beyond what can be created in a DIY manner. So I suppose I just like throw some questions that I personally find interesting that's related to smart infrastructure. And so these are the questions I have. So first is like, so who are we optimizing for? So when we talk about smart infrastructure, we often talk about, I think, optimization, like optimizing traffic or optimizing waste management, energy distribution, etc. But when we talk to like people working in the government, either at the local level or at the national level, they often tell you how like implement policy. In the vast majority of cases, you're not able to benefit everyone, and you're picking like winners and losers. You're like prioritizing the subset of people at the expense of another subset of people. So when we talk about like optimization through smart infrastructure, who are we optimizing for? Who are we prioritizing, and who are we not prioritizing? Like, are we prioritizing like I don't know, like car drivers at the expense of pedestrians, or vice versa? Or are we prioritizing the economy or the environment? And who gets to set the priorities? And how can we ensure that citizens have a say in the process? And the second question is, can we cross the digital divide? So I'm a computer scientist, so I like to think that I'm decently proficient at computers, or like I have a decent level of tech literacy. But my mother is like completely, she's completely uninterested in anything tech. She knows how to use the cell phone, so she knows how to call me, but anything beyond that, she's not really interested in. So there seems to be a large digital divide, a large disparity in like the tech literacy among age groups, and even within the same age group. Last month we held this kind of a introductory AI class for elementary school kids, and I was the lecturer, and you already see the difference, right? They're all elementary school kids, but some kids are very proficient. They can like start creating all these like images using like this generative AI, like Midjourney. But some kids just like freeze in front of the screen, and they're like, oh, yeah. And so it seems like even within the same age group, there is like a lot of disparity in tech literacy. How can we ensure that the smart infrastructure serves everybody, not just those with the tech savvy? And the third is like how durable is smart infrastructure. And so today I'm wearing this like this kind of a mechanical watch, which is a completely obsolete technology. But you know, if there's one thing that's going for like this kind of dumb technology is that they can last for a long time if taken care of. And my wife has an Apple Watch, and she bought this very early version of the Apple Watch, and I think she got very good use out of the Apple Watch. But now it's sitting in the closet, right? So I think that's the nature of a lot of digital technology. They just become obsolete in the phase of maybe several years. But these dumb technology can last like sometimes generations. And so how we can like, I think the expectation with infrastructure is that they last a long time. So how can we reconcile that those expectations with like ephemeral nature of digital technology? So I'm just throwing questions out there, and so that's the real end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Yuichiro. Fantastic framing. There's lots of great stuff in there. Obviously, some really powerful questions, which tells me that you do know quite a lot about infrastructure, actually, despite what you just said. But those questions of durability, efficiency, optimization, you know, what's inefficient, what's efficient, who decides, those are really important. We'll come back to them for sure. So I will do the same, and then we'll get to our guests that Yuichiro and I have invited in. So my work is also to do with infrastructures, I guess, but infrastructures of everyday life is like how I like to frame it, really. So I don't necessarily mean the sort of heavy infrastructure, subways and 5G networks, perhaps, but the things that are more everyday and around us. And that can include like a local bar like this. This is a social infrastructure, technically, but of course it does intersect with things like the heavy infrastructures of subways and so on. So I'm just going to, unusually for me, because you'll see I use lots of pictures, I'm just going to describe this text that Yuichiro and I are kind of co-writing here, which we think might be potentially a framing piece, and we'll come back to you about it to see what you think about it, obviously, and maybe we'll co-edit it together perhaps. But just to set the scene, in the context of smart cities, which we know have been very led by the idea of technology, kind of finding a point within cities. So just to rebalance that a bit, we talked about how cities are really about culture and community and commerce, and they're kind of tangled together, questions of culture and nature and values and so on. And they're super local, but they also sit within these kind of planetary scale flows. So these complex things. Buildings and infrastructure and technologies then are really not the point of cities, but the enablers of things. So, and sometimes we get focused on the buildings and infrastructure, is probably a bit too much. But just we need to remind ourselves that they're there to facilitate things like culture and community. They're not a replacement for them in any way. And to some extent, we know that's the mistake that the smart city movement has made in the past, that it focuses on the instruments rather than the complexity of cities, or as Yuichiro just said, it focuses on operational efficiency rather than thriving cultures. And we don't make cities to be efficient, really. We make cities to produce thriving cultures and then everything that goes with that. And sometimes perhaps some of the best things about cities might be distinctly inefficient. So like conviviality, for instance. So instead we're kind of framing this conversation as a smart city actually will be built around intelligence, creativity, resourcefulness of its inhabitants, human and otherwise. So we want to bring in understandings of other beings in cities, more than human things as well, like other types of animals or plants and so on. And as Yuichiro also pointed out, we're both interested in this idea of adaptive urban technologies and things that can move and flex and change. But then, of course, the question of, well, how do they do that? Who decides? So I could just summarize that much more quickly with this quote by Cedric Price from 1966, who said, technology is the answer, but what was the question? So we're trying to dig in behind the question, behind the technology here to the question underneath, the deeper questions perhaps, knowing that that should help us frame the technology a little bit better or a little bit more powerfully. So the threads that I put together really were the things, again, I'm interested in. So I'm just, you might not be interested in them, that's totally fine, but I'm putting them out there in case we find some crossover. These ideas of these social infrastructures, things like this very simple bar in the middle of Tokyo. Like, what do they do within a neighborhood, and how do they happen? And there's lots of theory about this. I just picked up Eric Klinenberg's book there as the example, but there's plenty of understanding of why. But these things are often left behind or forgotten or devalued a bit, or seen as just doing perhaps one thing, when in fact they do multiple things. So libraries work as a kind of living room for the neighborhood, a workspace, a place for homeless people to have a wash or relax, a place for people to meet, as well as a place to acquire knowledge, as it were, or make something. Energy systems are increasingly social systems. I guess they always were, but they were previously at the scale of, let's say, a coal-fired power plant in the middle of country Victoria, which might then feed half of Melbourne, for instance, millions of people off one huge system. Whereas in Australia, we're really interested in this because we have the highest uptake of solar cells on rooftop in the world. So around 25 to 30% of all households, at domestic scale at least, have rooftop solar, and often increasingly now with batteries in the basement. So this example of a block is outside Perth in Western Australia. And those people are sharing the energy in their series of apartments. It's one shared system. They're using blockchain to actually shuttle the energy around there. And there's a question for me immediately about how do you build social fabric as a side effect of that? How do you build trust? How do you build resilience? How do we use less energy if that's possible? How do we share energy equitably? All of those things come to mind. So, if I live next door to Crystal and she's used up all the energy in our block, and then I can't make pasta, how do I deal with that? So I don't really want blockchain necessarily, in my view, to handle that relationship. I feel like we should have a human relationship, and I can knock on the door, or she can knock on the door, and we can promise to share some kilowatts better in future, right? That would be a social fabric way of solving the problem, as opposed to outsourcing that to software, which I think could be really problematic. But we know that software can do things that humans can't do, like smooth the peaks and with real precision in a way that Crystal and I just wouldn't be able to figure out, because we can't see into the generators and batteries in the same way that software can. So there's something really interesting about just this one example. It's social and cultural at the same time as being infrastructural and kind of about energy. And I know, Daisuke, a lot of your work has to do with these kind of situations, these distributed superlocal microgrids and how they fit into the rest of the city. But equally, we know it's the same with mobility systems. Now, this could be e-bike networks. In this case, I picked an autonomous shuttle, because I know that's interesting to Majid and Crystal. And this is a bus. So that's already interesting, I guess, that it's a shared vehicle, not a private vehicle. So not an individual self-driving car, which probably doesn't do that much to help congestion if it's an individual car. But a shared bus might work in areas of the city where it hasn't been economically viable to run a small private bus or a small public bus before, because we just couldn't afford it if it was super low density, say. But these things maybe can work in places that are super low density. We don't currently have any public bus transport at all. So it really depends on how we frame the technology, which I know is something Crystal's interested in. Blocks as social fabric. This is an amazing project in Bogota, looking at neighborhood blocks and how they can provide kindergarten services and retraining services, particularly for women who otherwise are stuck at home doing domestic unpaid labor. This lovely car park, which has turned into a playground in Stockholm, but the playground designers, the architects, designed it for birds as well as humans. So this is kind of half built with ducks in mind and half built with people in mind, and it finds a kind of a happy medium between the two. Quite happy anyway. When I was there, actually some geese were hatching their babies, and they were not very happy that I was there. So geese are scary, but anyway. This simple bathhouse, which is around the road from us in Collingwood here in Melbourne. It's a Japanese bathhouse, Sento, basically. So, we know that these perform a fantastic function in neighborhoods that are often, in Japanese cities, I know Sento have begun to disappear over the last decades. So interesting. So this whole list of things, which I'm constantly revising, are these bits in between houses and offices, that these shared spaces, and they're super powerful. They build community resilience, but we don't often understand necessarily what they're doing and how they're best placed within a neighborhood, or what kind of things you need to make a good neighborhood thrive. There's lots of mapping and understanding of things we could do with this. And of course, that works for new cities as well. This is a project that I helped with a little bit. last year, the Woven City project by Toyota, which has a lot of those questions in it about mobility and energy. But equally, we're looking at this in the context of, let's say, an existing Melbourne suburb, and you see that in the background there. Very low density, not that much amenity, very few social infrastructures, but some of these technologies could begin to bind the community together in a different way, and maybe that opens up other ideas for binding the community together, like nurseries and kindergartens and co-working spaces as well. So I'm interested in, again, these kind of how simple things do multiple things, actually. And I'm obsessed with streets as an urban designer. And I like this quote from Rebecca Solnit. She says that streets kind of have to do errands, which are jobs to be done, like streets have to have milk delivered to the local coffee shop or whatever. But they're also about epiphanies, which is kind of a funny word in English, but it means sort of a magical moment or an amazing encounter or incredible realization. So, you know, something magical happens in streets. You might find the person that you end up getting married to. You might find the person you start a band with. You might find the person that you start a business with. But equally, they are also functional places. So how we balance those are interesting. Japanese streets have a great tradition of this. As Kurokawa pointed out a long time ago, and it goes back, you know, even if you look at an Edo period woodblock print of Tokyo, you'll see a street full of doing 1,000 things simultaneously. But we've tended to then simplify them over time and say streets are for traffic and these other spaces are for those other things. So I'm interested in reversing that flow. And particularly, I worked on a project in Sweden about this, and we worked with the artist Brian Eno, who talked about a set of design principles for streets, which are really not about engineering at all or optimization, but more about kind of culture and exchange and change and ways of changing streets yourself. So that's one thing. Then I'm interested in this question of adaptation, and not just sort of how cities change, but then the material qualities of that. So circular design practice is something I'm particularly interested in, including with Japan. Part of this, though, is about who's involved in decision-making, which Yuichiro pointed out, who decides, essentially. This is work I did in Sweden with the Swedish Prime Minister, but we also did the same work with school kids and redesigning their streets, essentially. And we let the school kids be the designers because they are the experts in their street. The traffic planner is 7 kilometers away in a town hall, and he or she doesn't really know much about the street, but these kids are there every day. So they got to decide, actually. And then that led to this prototype, which is now running across about 25 different Swedish cities. Again, parklet model that Yuichiro pointed out, which is a very simple way of transforming things immediately, but then also with the potential for system change over time. Again, if done in a certain way. If it's just tactical as a one-off, it really doesn't change much except a few square meters that it changes. But if it's part of a broader scheme, then it can be quite a powerful way of building change in a city. And the fact that I made them in wood, actually, or we asked the designers to make them in wood, is because people can change it. And it doesn't last that long either. So I'm interested in these temporary structures, like these kawadoko in Kyoto that appear in the summer and then disappear, I guess. Yuichiro, are they being built about now, or do they get built in another month or so?
I think they should be building them now. I have to go check.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So this just enables bars to extend. They're kind of like parklets in the river. That's how I kind of think about them. They enable them to extend out over there, and then they can come and go. And because they're made of wood often, or simple materials, that enables people to transform them and build them themselves very quickly. And again, you see this everywhere in Japanese cities. You see people taking care of whatever space they feel they are allowed to take care of. And that's not so much legal. Sometimes it's legal, but it's also cultural. So this kind of street gardening is done everywhere, as you guys know, purely citizen-led, essentially. And kind of taking care of the street in a way which I think is interesting, and it throws questions of respect and community and who does it and why, what do you need to do it, but it's very powerful. And then this idea of building for change, these are the Ise temples in Japan, which go back at least 1,300 years, but are rebuilt every 20 years. So by rebuilding it, they last forever. Whereas if you build something static, it actually lasts for 100 years, or maybe 50 years or less even. But if you build something to change, and this is where wood is interesting, it lasts forever. So these kind of circular practices are interesting. And there's a question of these sort of layers of change within that. What moves quickly, what moves slowly? As Yuichiro pointed out, an Apple Watch as a technology moves rapidly. An analog watch from the 1950s still works, and so these things can also be applied to infrastructural thinking. So then, nearly there, how do we make decisions together? So the street stuff was also about how can we build a platform in public, which is about asking questions about the future. And I think Yuichiro's Wikitopia project is also in line with this as a digital platform. And we built it more as a sort of physical platform, as in these were things that people could change. And it kind of asks the question, do you want a parking space or do you want trees? You know, or do you want a theater or do you want seats? You know, it's kind of up to them, but it enables them to think that through on their terms. It becomes a question for them, not a question for the transport planner again. And there's lots of interfaces stuff I've done here with augmented reality and others. This is one with UN Habitat using actually Minecraft as a modeling platform that we worked on with Ericsson. I'm not showing you the interface, I'm showing you the reactions of the kids who worked on this thing. So this is like if Yuichiro's project turns into augmented reality and you let people redesign their city and overlay it onto the real city behind them. These guys could not believe, you know, what was possible here. It was so delightful for them to think that their city could change with their input. They were just blown away by it. So we just do not make it open to people actually in a very simple way. There's other very simple ways of doing it, just like doing better drawings and plans, which is what we did in Sheffield in the UK. And then there's the question of who decides to what end, what variables are in play here. And so what we put on here with the street project is, you know, streets can also produce birdsong or theater or social exchange. They don't have to just have the metrics of number of cars per hour minus number of deaths per year. You know, so it's an open question as to what a street can do. Many different types of value. And that means different also decision makings at different scales. So this 1 minute city scale on the left-hand side, out the street outside your front door, Yuichiro and I can make the shared garden, or Krista and I can actually make a microgrid at that scale as well now, which is interesting. And it's kind of up to us. We build it together for us and our immediate colleagues or whatever. It's also part of a wider citywide network, which is also complex and interesting. So there's a regional grid at the 60-minute scale, which is really done usually by the government or a large company that's got a very different decision-making culture around it. And then there's this messy bit in the middle, which moves backwards and forwards, as in, if we have enough microgrids in a city now, do we need the regional grid? It's a kind of a question, right? And that wasn't a question previously. So finally, my last thing is about understanding the nature of the word technology, really, and just running to broaden that out a little bit to understand low technologies and high technologies. And there's this quote by the science fiction writer Ursula K. Le Guin, who describes technology as the active human interface with the material world, which is a very open and rich definition of technology, I think. So anything that humans have made or shaped to enable us to interact with the material world is technology from her point of view. So this is clearly a technology, I'm sure we'd all agree. This is the omniprocessor, which turns dirty sewage water into clean drinking water, which is amazing, you know, and it's built in Dakar in Senegal. So you feed in sewage and you get drinking water. But the East Kolkata wetlands does the same thing. And it was done a long time ago. It is completely a technology, although it's made out of wetlands, so trees and rivers and pools of water and reeds and things like this, because it's shaped by humans. It is not naturally occurring. It's designed and architecturally or landscape architecture designed by humans. And if you look at the performance, I think the East Kolkata wetlands is really interesting in this respect, because the omniprocessor does 14 tons of sewage a day, which is a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's amazing. But the East Kolkata wetlands processes 700 million tons of sewage a day and cleans the water as it goes, but producing that much fish and rice and vegetables and 80,000 jobs, and protects the city from storms and all kinds of other things at the same time again. So it is a technology. It's a very different kind of technology. And so there's an expanded idea of technology there, I guess. And we know that omniprocessor might be good for some things. The wetlands is good for other things, but we tend to downplay the wetlands because we can't turn it into a high growth startup very quickly. And it's difficult to understand how it could be monetized, actually, other than selling the fish or the rice, I guess. So yes, I wanted to just put that on the table and say there's this much richer understanding of technology, which in Australian Indigenous culture goes back tens of thousands of years, as to how you work with landscape and environment in a kinship relationship, a kind of symbiotic relationship, essentially. So it's cultural and technological and natural all at the same time. So I will leave it there. And because I've gone on long enough. But I'm now interested to see, Majid, would you like to share your thoughts with us and share some of your...
Sure, no worries. To share, right. Can you see it now?
It's, yep, we see it.
Thank you, guys. So I'm an engineer, so I have an engineering view. Was very impressed by the presentation before me. So hopefully I can provide a bit of context in this. So I'm going to talk about a project that I started since I joined Melbourne University back in 2016. And it's called AIMS, Australian Integrated Multimodal Ecosystem. So the idea here is how to take advantage of technology, come with innovation, and make sure that whatever you bring in is useful, is scalable. You understand it before you go out and basically, try to bring it to the real life. So provide a bit of context in that. So what I'm presenting is on behalf of a lot of people that are actually helping me in the working together, including Professor Sweatman and a few other people mentioned here. So this is a program across the Faculty of Engineering Information Technology. Go to the next slide. All right, so what it is, as you can see, is kind of a largest ecosystem you can find anywhere around the world that using real life, real streets, and trying to understand what kind of technology can be put together to address major issues in transportation, which everybody knows, congestion, emission, safety, sustainability, those kind of big tickets. So roughly this area is about 100 kilometers of road network. Melbourne University is located here next to Lygon Street. So, and here, south part of this area is the Melbourne CBD or downtown. So this area is about 180 plus, close to 100 intersections, signalized intersection. We have all kind of complexity here, a lot of bicycles. Recently, Melbourne coming back to having congestion even worse than pre-COVID. So we have a lot of bicycles going north-south to the city. We have trams, trucks, cars, everything. So it's a perfect sort of, place to study traffic and transport and technology. So at the moment, we having over 10,000 devices providing information to us, and we're using this information to understand how to address those major issues that I mentioned. So this is the partners at the moment. The list of partners is not 100% up to date, but give you just some idea about who are interested in this domain and why they are interested. So we have partners, from different background, from technology, from device development, from data and IT background, like AWS, city logistics provider, transport provider, so on and so forth. So it's just suggesting how complex it is to address modern transport issues, as everybody's trying to do. So that's the current sort of status of that. Just give you some understanding when I tell you about sort of device that we installed. For example, in this photo, you can see we have a LiDAR that measure the density and the speed of vehicles traveling on this road. Here we have emission sensor. Here we have a bell-shaped camera that provided, a very good view of what is happening on the road. This is another one. We're using this, for example, for a project, we call it Green Wave, providing bicycles a priority to be detected and get going. Here we have communication device, it's called DSRC. It's quite popular in Japan as well. provide communication with vehicles as they come to the intersection. They can get exchanging data and information with the signal. For example, this is now the red signal coming, or there is another vehicle coming at you from right-hand side, or there's a pedestrian on the road. So variety of information can be exchanged by this device. So we have lots and lots of these devices installed on a real road, and we're studying what is happening and collecting a lot of data and deploying different technologies, machine learning and different ways of, combining technologies together in this. So for example, we also installed device to public transport buses. This is a bus that moves around this area. So we put this DSRC, dedicated short-range communication to the bus. So we know where the bus is going and can exchange, for example, data about how many passengers are on the board and so on and so forth. We have done the same thing with the trucks that provide delivery to supermarkets. So you can, understand some of the applications. So same device here. We also worked with Toshiba Japan on a project putting cameras in front of trams for a variety of utilizations, such as safety and operation perspective. So this is a stereo camera device collecting some information. For example, counting number of vehicles as the tram moves in the network. So you collect lots of data. It shows the, what is the density of traffic on the map real time as the tram moves around the network. We have lots of these trams, so we can collect a lot of data. So we're using the tram as a data collection facility. This is another shot showing the vehicle coming through the intersection, and see that there's so many vehicles waiting at the signal. Now, this is another application of this technology, counting passengers as the tram comes to the stop. Counting passengers in both sides and sending this information to the tram operators, so they know how many people are waiting for trams. So and also for safety, for example, if people walking on a track and tram needs to slow down, this is a major issue in Melbourne. We have a lot of accident and incident with trams by people, by vehicles moving on a track. So the idea is to understand how we can use technology to reduce some of these issues. This is another project. We're using Wi-Fi, for example, with Cisco in one of the busiest Melbourne city underground train stations to understand the movement of people when the train comes to the platform, where they're coming, how many people on the platform, how many using escalator, how many using elevator, where they move. So we can use, again, this information to operate the platform more efficiently. This is another example of one of the corridor in the Ames that is operated by CAPS. CAPS is an Austrian company based in Europe. So again, here the idea is to operate the corridor for safety, not for throughput. So at the moment, most of the transport system around the world try to get more vehicles going through the network. So that's the measure of efficiency. Here we're trying to improve the safety. For example, we have a lot of devices. We estimate and predict the safety of the corridor. When we're getting to certain threshold, we could start to reduce the vehicles that, for example, going through this corridor. For example, if we know at this intersection is going to be a lot of potential conflict with bicycles, then we can start ahead of the time, reduce the number of vehicles going through the corridor proactively, and reducing that kind of crashes. So it's a new concept that government trying to understand in terms of operating for safety rather than efficiency, the operation for throughput, and giving them a tool to be able to do it. There's another sort of a snapshot of the vision from the cameras. So as you can see, it's a very busy intersection, a lot of things happening. So you need to understand how to deal with it. As Dan mentioned, we also have our own autonomous vehicle in Melbourne University. It's just for research, it's not for providing any service, but we are very interested to understand how this could be part of the solution. And we know that there's a big project happening in Japan. It's called Road to L4. A lot of companies are involved. We're very interested in that. We're talking to Tokyo University, Nagoya University, to see if we can basically working together on that sort of same topic. As Dan mentioned, a lot of opportunity down in Australia in that sense. And this is just a snapshot of one of the signal controller in Melbourne. I'm sure Japan is pretty the same. A lot of this technology are analog. They put them in 1970. They're still using them because it's not easy to change them. The idea is how to augment them, how to gradually improve them, how to make them smarter, because the transport system is much more challenging. We are interested in safety, we are interested in equity. It's not just about cars, so it's about everybody. So we need to enhance them, and that's why we put aims in place, because we wanted to have a real world opportunity in large scale to study this. So for example, in this slide, we're putting new devices, cameras, edge computing that goes to here, because this doesn't have any capacity to do any kind of edge computing. So we put edge computing here to use the camera, do some action, and just the data, so we don't have any issue with the privacy data and those kind of things. So practical edge computing for transport. And finally, we have done a lot of projects with Lexus, Toyota, and this is one of them. Basically, Lexus is putting this connectivity devices to every vehicle they sell from 2024. We look at a lot of use cases. There was a lot of aspiration from Japan. Lexus Japan got some really interesting data from their sort of deployment in Japan. For example, they reduced the 7% the time that ambulance requires to travel on Tokyo network by deploying this technology. 7% is a huge amount of sort of time saving for crucial ambulance to get to the patients and get to the hospital. So we tested this technology also in Melbourne for Melbourne sort of context, and a lot of good lesson came out of it that we shared globally with whoever was interested in this this area. So just if you are interested, we have a lot of information on our page, videos, white page, that we published, and news and articles that you can have a look. So stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Majid. That's fantastic. Super interesting, I think, in terms of the idea of that distributed network and putting intelligence via edge computing in a distributed pattern. And it immediately makes me wonder what else we can connect to those edges. But then, as Yuichiro, I suppose, also pointed out about keeping infrastructures separate and adaptable as well, not locking in things too tightly together, given they're changing so quickly. So anyway, maybe we'll pick up those threads later. Daisuke, would you like to go next, please?
Yeah, I will introduce our project, what we are doing. Yeah, so we have started from the microgrid, but now we are trying to make a virtual power grid. And yeah, I will first introduce, and later let's discuss it. Oh, sorry. So for the first, these are some research topics in Sony Computer Science Laboratories, and we are doing this research for a planet we call planetary agenda, which are related to the planet. And there are energy, agriculture, and space project. And now we are working for the energy. And our project name is Open Exchange Systems, OXS project. And our objective is here. Our team is doing the research related to the planetary agenda, and we want to make the positive transformation for planetary boundaries. Especially, we are working for the energy topic, so we think that our technology could have a positive transformation for climate change or biosphere integrity or land system change. And we think that we are doing this research for the renewable energy, and by using renewable energy, we think that we can expand the area of human activities, and also by using the technology, and to by navigating the consumer's behavior, to accelerate the introduction of renewable energy. These are the two two aspects of the renewable energy. And our approach is now, one is to navigate the human activities for the energy usage, and one is the technology to supply the energy by using dynamic energy networks. To navigate energy usage, now we are trying to visualize the energy, how they are using, and providing adding value to customers, consumers, how to motivate them to change the energy usage, which will be effective to introduce more renewables. And other one is for the technology point, we are making some microgrid technology, and and the next step, we want to make the combination of wired and mobile transmission according to the consumer's behavior. And here is our approach, our project approach. And here is our technology. We have built a peer-to-peer matching technology. At first, we have built a microgrid in some areas and doing some feasibility studies for energy peer-to-peer technology. And next, our plan is to expand this peer-to-peer technology to mobility or food, to transport the energy or transport the food, and makes the supply and demand matching. Here is some feasibility study we did in the past. First one is a DC microgrid construction in Okinawa, Japan. Okinawa is a southern island of Japan, and we built a microgrid, DC microgrid there. Here is a picture of the microgrid, and there are some faculty houses in the university in Okinawa, which the professor or their families are living in these houses. And we use 19 faculty houses and installed PV panel and batteries to each house, every 19 houses. And usually they supply the energy from their PV or batteries. But if there is a lack of energy, they ask other houses to share the energy. And these 19 houses share the energy and introduce or improves the self-sufficiency of PV panel renewable energies. And the energy is not feed into the utility grid. They are only sharing the energy between these microgrids and not feeding. And we also introduced the energy visualization system, and the householders of these 19 houses can access to this visualization system. One is they can see the energy status of 19 houses, and they can know that everyone, the energy in the community is enough or not. And also they can see their house data to know the past history of how they are using energy and how should they improve the energy usage. And we also did some user survey to the householders, and know everyone has a different motivation for using the energy. Someone wants a monetary, and someone wants to use the renewable energy, and someone is more motivating in the how to say the energy supply in the disaster cases or the blackout cases. And next, we are doing the feasibility study in the Tokushima, also in Japan. This is mountain areas in Japan, and using we call workation facility. People are working in this facility and install PV panel and also the electric vehicle to deliver the energy between some places, this facility and the facility in the town, to deliver the energy from the town to this facility or facility to the town. Now we also doing some education program in this facility because we are developing an energy sharing software, and this software has been open sourced, and everyone can connect to this. Everyone can use this software, and using this software and also the energy equipment to learn how the renewable energy, or how energy is making and supplying by using the real facilities. And from here is our next plan. And first is a transformation of power network. I put some transmission line picture in the left side. One is Japan, one is Australia. That currently it's like a fishbone architecture network, and we think that it will be changed to the small world or scale-free type of network. For example, in Japan, the population is decreasing, and it is difficult or the cost of the energy transmission is coming more expensive in the future, especially in the island areas or mountain areas or rural areas. And in that case, we think that new architecture of power network is needed or is effective in the future. And here is to make more efficient power transmission network. Our idea is to make a virtual power grid. This virtual power grid is first some of the areas or communities are connected by the microgrid, and make a microgrid in some areas, and deliver or connect these microgrids by not using the transmission line, but using the mobility system to connect these microgrids and share the energy between these microgrids. And here is our simulation for the cost of transmitting electricity. The blue line shows the transmit cost for the mobile system, mobile transmission. And the red line shows the cost for the wired transmission. And the x-axis shows the transmission distance. When you go to the right side, it becomes a long distance, and left side is short distance. And the transmission cost will vary by the load factor, and if we in the future, or if the population, for example, in Japanese case, the population is decreasing, and if you install some PV panel in your house, the load factor of transmission line will become more lower, and the cost will become more higher. So that in the that case, the mobile power transmission will be cheaper. But on the other hand, when you make a very close or like a microgrid system, the transmission distance will be much closer. And in that case, wired power transmission will be cheaper. So our idea is to combine these wired and mobile power transmission transmission. And here is the other problem of energy system, that in this case, it shows energy demand and supply balance of 1 day for some one of the facility. And this orange line shows the demand of a facility, which uses energy from around 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. And blue line shows the energy supply from PV panel. And it's PV panel, so it's only generates energy in the noontime. And for the best case, the orange line is like this, and the blue line is this, and it could be balanced. But the blue line, the PV panel generation will be fluctuate, depends on the weather. Sunny day, it generates more energy, but in the cloudy day, it cannot generate the energy. And on the other hand, orange line, demand also fluctuate, depends on the energy demand. For example, if the office and factory demands depends on the day of the week, and it's, I would say, not effective to absorb this fluctuation only by using a fixed battery, because some days it doesn't need a battery, but some days it needs a battery, and operation rate of the battery is not high, so it will be very expensive to absorb all the energy by the fixed battery. So we think that like a flexible storage solution using EV's battery will be more effective to absorb this kind of demand and supply difference or balance. Oops. And here is some a simulation we did to absorb the supply and demand balance by using EV's battery. And this shows the x-axis shows the number of EV cars. Like left side is no EV car, but this one is 4, 12, and the right one is 46 EVs. And the y-axis shows the cost of the system, and this this gray one shows energy cost. It includes electricity cost and oil cost for the car, both costs. And the blue one shows a PV panel, and orange one shows an EV charger. It doesn't include EV car cost, but only cost includes the EV charger cost. And we think that by using the EV car batteries, the cost comes not so expensive, because it can reduce the energy cost. And this blue line self-sufficiency ratio will become much higher by using these EV cars without additional cost, with keeping the same cost. And we think that EVs will be very effective for some facilities to introduce more renewable energy. Yeah, thank you. That's all for me.
That's great. Thank you, Daisuke. That was super interesting. And again, sort of interesting overlap with Majid. And yet sort of different systems, but obviously they're directly connected as well. We're talking about moving energy around, or we're talking about vehicles with powered by energy. And so it's interesting seeing those patterns of those two distributed networks coming together physically as well. Okay, Crystal, going to hand over to you.
Yeah, sure. Let me just share my screen.
Close this out.
There we go. That was really interesting. And I've been jotting down notes to figure out how to kind of draw threads between what I'm going to present and the presentations before me. I'm like the anti-designer in a design school. So my slides aren't as fancy. They're really quite boring. But in part, that's because I'm more of a theoretician as well, a critical theorist. So in my work, I tend to focus a lot on questions of power and politics, and I foreground that in everything that I do, so that transport becomes the case for those bigger questions of power and politics. And participation, which is the other area that I spend a lot of time thinking about, is kind of a mode through which to navigate the complex power relationships that, you know, sit in the contemporary city. So when we ask the question, dialogue of future urbanism, which I think is the kind of the broad kind of theme for our discussion today, I can't help but think about the question that was raised earlier, you know, for whom are we designing this city for? And there are quite a few actors who have quite a lot of power in this city, in all cities, and have considerable roles in dictating paths that are possible. So my entry into this discussion today is to really start from the point of view of the person, the citizen, the community, the neighborhood, as a way of thinking about the answer to that question, who are we planning for? So what I'll present are a few slides that kind of set up where I'm coming from. And then I'm going to kind of land the presentation very quickly on work that I'm currently focused on in future work. I very rarely do research with politicians and practitioners, but they are the subject of my focus. Oftentimes I interview them a lot, I run focus groups. But the thing that I'm aiming to understand is, how do we democratize a city when the essence of our democracy is under considerable threat in lots of different ways. And sometimes we can be a bit complicit in that. So I like to throw the focus onto myself as an academic, as an actor in that system, to think about, well, what can I do about that? And how might I serve communities? So for many years, I continue to do this. I am an academic / activist. So, and I bring those two worlds together. So I spend a lot of time hanging out with community groups, and what I tend to understand, what I'm looking to understand, is how they're intervening in the city. So thinking about, you know, how are they editing the Wikitopia city? You know, like how are they intervening? How are they creating space? How are they expanding their spaces? And when I say expanding their spaces, what I mean is, how are they making power? How are they making power through grassroots-led processes? And this is an image here that was taken, I believe, in 2017 at the start of the parliamentary seating period. That's the state parliament for Victoria. And these are communities that represent different geographies in metropolitan Melbourne, who were really worried about how transport planning was being performed in the state. And for specifically the role of ongoing building of toll roads, as it turns out, because we got a lot of them here. And they decided that in the absence of a transport plan and this very complex state that we are situated in here in Melbourne, we don't have a transport plan, which seems absurd. And so what we saw were community groups coming together over a series of weekends. And I was present in those discussions in the library, designing what they thought the community transport plan may look like. And so they sat on the steps of Parliament on the opening sitting day and welcomed all the parliamentarians into their work day with one piece of paper with 5 points, and that was the transport plan. Very simply stated as an inclusive transport system, one that better serves those that are more marginal in our community, one that also shows up to the climate crisis and decarbonizes transport, which includes, for instance, of course, the rollout of electric vehicles, but mostly it's about how do we get people out of their cars and what does the future city look like in that respect. So these are conversations being led by communities. And the reason why this is really particularly noteworthy is because they're also responding to the ways in which the planning system is not showing up for communities any longer. So we do lots of formal community participatory events, but often they can be quite, they're symbolic of where we might want to go, but they lead very, they don't always lead to the action and change or the changing of the political mandates, which often continue to serve out of capital. So often when we think about community meetings and participatory processes, not the ones that Dan presented because they're really quite interesting and cool, and I'd like to be in those meetings, but typically they look like this, you know, people who are sitting, being talked at, and they're bored. And oftentimes there might be exhibitions where there are designs, or maybe there's some augmented reality, but no one shows up. So what's going on there? And so I've written quite a lot on this idea that there's a crisis of participatory planning, and that it's something that we really need to give our attention to. So while there's quite a lot of dialogue and consideration about how to do participation better, what my concern is that participation is there to serve the interests of a built outcome, and it doesn't interrogate the efficacy, the value of what it is that we're building. So linking into those questions that were raised earlier on, who are we serving? You know, who are we optimizing the city for? Those are really live questions, but those are political questions, and they are questions about power. They can be very difficult questions to ask. So I spend a lot of time thinking about politics, and I read extensively in political philosophy. And one of the things that I find really, really interesting is this, you know, this throwaway tagline of we want democratic cities without really interrogating what that actually means. And there's quite a lot of scholarship out there at the moment around this idea of a scandal of democracy, right? That we are quite just skirting across the edges of what a healthy, vibrant, robust, democratic city might look like. And so the scandal is that we are doing participatory planning, we're inviting communities into spaces to be in dialogue with us about the future of X and Y. But really the main game is happening somewhere well and truly outside of those participatory spaces. So the scandal is that we're not really being honest about what's going on. So this is something that I'm trying to kind of wrestle with in my work, is how do we really call out power so that when we do participation, when we design events that bring diverse individuals into the conversation, that we do so in a way that is meaningful, intentional, and actually leads to outcomes that serve communities. So when we talk about meaningful participation, and I've got my square quotes in hanging here, you know, what does that actually mean? What does meaningful even mean? Meaningful for whom and for what? So very boring slide here, just a couple of papers. So these are things that I've been writing. They just came out, and what they're talking about, and this is kind of, you know, we're part of the elite, right? Sony, Melbourne University, us as academics, you know, we're part of those who can inform the city because our privileged position within it. And so I write a lot about these elite networks and the kind of deal making that kind of occurs and the way way the planning systems around the world kind of facilitate the ways in which elite actors are able to influence. So kind of coming back to participation in this idea of meaningful participation is also to be really aware of where power lies and how we could mobilize community groups so that while we're building really interesting places in our cities that are vibrant and they're imaginative and they are indicative and illustrative of the kind of city we want, what we desire, that we also do so in a way that is changing the decision, the power constellation in the city, I guess, is to state it quite bluntly. So the promise is, and we had our presentation from Majid around, driverless vehicles and all these technologies. This is a trackless tram, which for me looks like a bus, but I don't know. We can put that up for debate. But the promise is that these technologies are going to serve us in ways that are going to transform our cities for the better. But I think we always have to sit and problematize that really important question of, will they really? And if they do, what is our role in ensuring that those more progressive pathways are taken? And again, progressive, is one of those buzzwords. We have to interrogate that even. For whom are we planning the city? So, I like showing this to my, to my students. It's, it's a great image. It's a very well-known image of, cars take up a lot of space. We get a lot of people on buses, we take up even less space, and we get a lot of people walking or cycling, and we're doing even better. But yet this is what we're kind of confronted with the rise of new technology, isn't it? Is the electric car, the autonomous car is just taking up more space. And so I think we really have to grapple with that and really participate in the political dialogue around what the role of some of these technologies will be. Some of research coming out is suggesting that with the rise of electric cars, people are going to be driving more. People might own more cars as well, and that may not be an outcome we desire. It might be an unintended consequence of the rise of this new technology. But how do we intervene in that? And so some of the work previously on the smart technologies in terms of managing flows of people and good might be one really empowered instrument to help us intervene in those broader sort of political questions around what are we doing with our public space. So power ahead, I spend a lot of time thinking about public transport, thinking about active transport, how we move around the city. My concern is that we're just going to perpetuate on mobility, but that is also linked with, of course, the price of land, the price of housing, and the cost of living pressures, which are going up. So this leads me to the work that I'm doing now, this new body of research, which is looking at questions of spatial equity in the city. So linking back to that question, who are we optimizing the city for, and really thinking about that spatially as well. And there's been a lot of discussion here in Australia, in Melbourne, really powerful pieces in our local newspaper, The Age, which is telling the story, the lived experience of those who are just trying to get about their life, trying to get to work, trying to get to uni, trying to get to the doctors, and they're stuck waiting for the tram or the bus that may never show up. And so these are really powerful questions. So when we talk about the rise of technology and also the human and the non-human, what I also want to focus on is how do we get down to the stories of individuals? Because they're really, really powerful. They can really tell us a lot about how this future city is going. And who's being looked after and who's not. And my greatest concern is that we are just perpetuating different forms of marginality as we move forward. But yet this is what we're getting. This is the proposed road for Melbourne, not yet built. It's on its way. It's a double-decker road coming into a neighborhood near you. This is the Westgate Tunnel. We tried to stop it. We lost that battle. And it's just going to build more and send more cars into the CBD, which goes against all the policy policies that we've seen here in the state for 2 decades. So question of power is really, really important, because whilst we focus on the reimagining of space and streets and cities, we've got big players that are out there changing and transforming the city in ways that are irreconcilable. And so these are really difficult questions for us. And this is a very Melbourne focused presentation, so my apologies, but I do think some of this extends to other cities elsewhere. So where does this leave me? And this is my final slide. So I do spend a little time with community groups, both in my academic life, but also in my social life, doing a lot of activism and advocacy. And so I'm really interested in new methodologies to kind of understand this question of change, this understanding of how do we show up in a climate affected world, how do we decarbonize, but how do we do so in a way that also changes the democratic processes of city planning? So I'm really interested in a methodology around critical participatory action research. I throw the word critical in there because I think that demands from us reflective practice. So practice that we reflect with our communities that we're serving, but also practice that we, that relies on us to do some of that critical reflective work as well, so that we grow in these processes and we adapt and change our research practices as new sort of power relationships are formed. So situating the researcher, the academic institution, scholarship as an actor in that process as well. So I come from a humanities tradition, critical social researcher, and I very much see myself as an actor in research as well. So I'm studying myself, which could be really, really confronting at times. But that in part has showed up for me in my work, because when I went out doing research with community groups, they wanted me to show up and speak with them in different places where power was really being performed, and it was very unequal. So I tend to give a lot of my time doing that kind of work, and it's so rewarding, but it's hard, really, really hard. So I guess what my take home here is power politics matters. I'd love to feed that into our conversation today. What are the different methodological or approaches to research that we might explore in critical participatory action research? Community-led participatory processes are two. And then also, what is our role and what is our agency in some of these broader questions as well? So that's it, Dan.
Great. Thank you so much, Crystal. It's fantastic to bring that perspective in a way at the end, because it kind of basically sort of bookmarks our discussion that's going to happen next. Now, it kind of helps frame that. And it's really important, obviously, to land on this point of power and politics underneath these systems of energy and mobility and city making, which we heard from Yuichiro and me, I guess, and also Daisuke and Majid. Majid has had to leave us, sadly. We were lucky to have him at all, I think, because he had this surgery, this operation recently, and so he was on medication. But thank you, Majid, for coming. And he said in the chat he's really keen to continue the discussion. So I'll make sure that we do that with you. But so now we've got about half an hour for a discussion. Just anything that is really beginning to occur to you as an interesting question, something you'd like to change what you said based on what you heard, or something you'd like to ask of someone else, or a point of connection. And maybe I'd start with, I think maybe Kotaro, I'd like to hear your reflection if possible, as well as Yuichiro, obviously. You don't have to say anything, just to be clear, but you've sat through all of us now talking very quietly and politely. So if there's anything that, to be generous to you, to give you the chance, if there's anything that you'd like to foreground or highlight, and then I'll ask Yuichiro as well, because you started us off. But Kotaro, what do you say? What did you hear?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. So I think last, present, two things very interesting, and also find some connection what we are doing or what we have done. One is the presentation from Dan about the shared energy community. I haven't heard about it and checked the something that's during the presentations. This is also the the concept is as same as what we have done, and also we are expanding what we have done in the past. So this might be a one kind of aspect we can share, discuss, and also expand. And the other is the Crystal's presentations about how people involved for the kind of city planning, in case of how the transportation. Actually, we are working with the local government in Tokushima, which Kawamoto-san presented, and we hopefully, if we get the subsidized, we will work for the decarbonization of the area funded by Japanese government, which aim to 100 decarbonization in next 5 years or 6 years. And one of the the important point, how we involved in the community of people in this aspect, because in some cases, especially here in Japan, we have some backlash about to install the renewable energy, such as the wind turbine destroy the landscape, or bring some bad effect on the human body. So that's how to deliver what we are going to and how beneficial to the community, and besides how make them involved to that movement is something is very important. Actually, Daisuke want to have something to say about what he is doing now, and also it's this must be a multi-layer activity to focus on the youth generation and also elder generations, and they see the situation differently. And also we need to consider the social position in the community, how they will kind of melange, in France, mix those ideas and make something, find some compromise points, so to say, or some mutual agreement, something like that. So that's in this sense, we see some points to discuss with the father. That's what I learned or thought during the presentation.
Thank you. No, very interesting. And I had similar reflections, I think. And maybe actually before I come to you, Yuichiro, we jumped to Daisuke on this question because I was really struck by Daisuke and your work in Tokushima, in Okinawa, I think, in the visualization you made for the community of how everybody's energy was performing in the community. It was very transparent, as in you could see how your neighbor's energy use was alongside your own. And that isn't something that we've been able to do, I don't know, in the modern time at all. Maybe 200 years ago, you could tell just by looking. But now it's really super transparent. And it was probably a question I was going to ask Majid as well about his mobility network and how it could begin to describe the way that prioritization is happening. So for instance, in Melbourne, the trams are prioritized in the road networks, more or less. So they kind of get a bit more of a green light. It's not often thought that way because it happens to be that the tram lines are basically the same as the car lines. So the cars also get a green light quite often. So he's trying to build this green wave system where a bike can get priority. A bicycle, if you get 2 or 3 bicycles in a bike lane, the cameras look ahead and they switch the lights green so that the bike doesn't have to slow down. But all of that decision-making is hidden or invisible. It's just in the algorithms, it's through the sensors. So building out maybe some of Crystal's thinking here around the decisions behind these systems and who decides. I was very struck by, as like Kotaro was, that in your system, Daisuke, you made all of the energy use transparent. What was the effect of that? Did people have a greater social relationship, or did you get arguments with people, or what effect do you think it had?
So how to say, first, our expectation was that people can see the energy status of the
Mm.
community. So if there is enough energy in the community, it is a chance to get cheap energy.
Right.
And if it's a lack of energy in the community, then they can sell in a higher price
Yeah.
of energy to the community. So we want to let these people to use energy. That kind of people's behavior will be more effective to use renewable energy.
Mm.
That's what we expect for this visualization system.
Yeah.
But eventually, only like 10% of the people use this system, and it was difficult to every people to use this visualization system or to change their behavior or the energy usage by using this system. So yeah, as Kotaro mentioned, we are now considering or how to involve the community or the people to how to say to effective, not effective is not might be not a good word, but to use renewable energy or to make some culture or lifestyle to use the more renewable energy.
That's interesting. Yeah, so it's really linked. Obviously, some people don't have the choice to change their energy use necessarily as well. Some life, sometimes when you need to put the washing machine on because you have a family and lots of washing, you just have to do it. So that's, yeah, I can see that. And it's, I think this maybe links to Yuichiro, right? Because I think there's a lot of your work, Yuichiro, is this kind of, how do you say, like the machizukuri kind of town making process together, the citizen participation led thing. And then, as Crystal points out, that works to some degree, but then also doesn't work when it comes to things usually, often, like major infrastructure decisions. Like those participation processes just sort of bounce off the big infrastructure decision because that's being dealt with somewhere else. So what did you think, Yuichiro? What did your reflections on this?
I was really like, I thought the point about power in politics that Crystal made was very important, and it's very eye-opening in a way. So, I do deal with like participatory practices, but I often give the example of the San Francisco parklet, right, in my studies, and the parklets. I give the example as I show them as an example of participatory urban practices. But you can argue, I think, that the sheer fact that San Francisco has this official program for parklets, the most important battle has already been won in a way. So there was this like a parklets started out as an illegal activity by activists, right? So activists, they were like angry how like San Francisco was, or all American cities were made for cars, prioritize cars instead of pedestrians. And so they started to kind of, insert coins into these parking meters, and they claimed that, okay, we own this space for a while, and they brought like lawn and benches and stuff like that. And that was like completely illegal activity at first, but they did in the end, they managed to, accept, they managed to make the city accept that this is a valuable practice and to turn it into official a program. Now they have an official parking program running for like more than 10 years. And so that process is the most important participatory process. And so in that sense, like if you're only looking at the parklet program that has been officialized, then we're not really looking at the most important, the most important and most like a kind of difficult battle with regards to like a participation. And So in a way, so I think it's a problem that I recognize, but I mean, kind of my instinct is to kind of avoid, because to make the problem more tractable. But it's something that we shouldn't avoid. Because that is like we should think about, like, if we're dealing with if you're thinking about how we can use technology to like facilitate citizen participation, then that kind of like the most difficult part of citizen participation, that should also be our like a target as well. So, I think it's very, very eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, thanks for that framing. It just brought something else to the fore for me, thinking about San Francisco. I mean, there's been books written about how particular battles have been won, right? Which has enabled certain more urban participatory outcomes to be possible, or pathways to be possible now. And so what I'm thinking about now is, in the context of this conversation, with all the sort of technologies and the sort of participatory urban practices, what is, or who is the enemy, so to speak? Like, how might those, the things that we're doing now have in sight or placed in view the next structural change, or the next cultural change, or the next, everything that is small, it still creates the conditions for something else to be possible, right? And I think that's the power of all the work that everyone is doing in this room. I just think about power and politics, so I can't help myself, but it's there in all of your work, very clearly to me. Yeah.
And maybe something that's interesting here is that obviously the technologies are enabling things to work at different scales. But parklet works at the scale of a parklet or a street, and I can do a parklet on my street. It doesn't stop you not doing a parklet on your street, Yuichiro, or vice versa, right? Whereas with the big freeway, that's running through multiple neighborhoods and landscapes. You don't have a choice about it, in the sense, and that's why it's so problematic when it happens without apparent legitimacy. So, but I suppose what's interesting about energy is energy used to also be at that scale, or still is in Australia and Japan, isn't it? Most energy, I'm sure, in Australia and Japan is coming from large-scale networks. I know it is. So it then tends towards these large-scale political decisions. But Daisuke, your work is so interesting because it immediately says, well, that can also work at the scale of a parklet or a street, increasingly. And that's why I showed the project in Australia in my slides. It's 4 houses connected together. It has solar cells on the top. It's got batteries in the basement. In Australia, there's so much sun that would get you through a lot of your energy needs. Not all of them, but a lot of them, increasingly. And as batteries get more effective, more and more so. And then, as you also point out, we can begin to think about moving energy around at a small scale, just with electric vehicles. Something we're interested in actually is how does a suburb work like that? So if you have, I'm sure you've looked at this, Daisuke, but people, and if they drive to work or they drive to the shops in an electric vehicle, they're moving the energy to the shops. It might be a full energy battery, or it might be empty, in which case they're then charging up at the shops, but they could equally be storing energy there or moving it back from the shops back to the residential environment. And so you have this possibility about these very small scale networks. So I think it's kind of like the dynamic that Yuichiro talks about with the parklets could potentially also work at this energy scale. So yeah, I was really struck with this possibility of beginning to think of small scale networks being something where we can increase the participation level. And so you start with people and you start with a neighborhood scale. Does that map onto how you're thinking about Tokushima or Okinawa, where you're working in that kind of, are you beginning to think a kind of neighborhood, they join together in a kind of, as you said, a virtual power grid at the scale of a district? Or are you kind of focused on the micro level of how do I get the electrons from the roof to the basement and then across the street,
That's what we have started in Tokushima. That first connect the neighbor by the distributed line, and then next using the EV car to connect its neighbor, or some who are a bit far from the neighbor. And so I'm very interested with Majid research. We have developed some technology to share the energy between houses or share the between EV and their houses. But so far, we are now researching the movement of the EVs, how EV is moving, and when they can charge or discharge, when they can go to the house, or when they can go to the shops. So we don't have such kind of data. So it's interesting to see such kind of data, the transportation data, and investigate if it can match to the energy flow of the house or shop.
Yeah, I mean, that occurred to me was an immediate overlap, I think, between yours, your work and Majid's work, where he has basically like mobility data at scale, and you have energy data at a certain scale, and you kind of want to use each other's data, I guess, to understand. You don't want to be adding electric vehicles to the mobility network if the mobility network is congested already, because then it's, there's no point trying to move energy if it's already congested. And in Melbourne, it probably is already congested. So, but equally, when the mobility network is at a low demand, then maybe it's a good time to move some energy around. But then how does that happen? Is that an autonomous vehicle that can go in like at 4 o'clock in the morning because it's quiet, and that's a perfectly good time to do it? It can be slow moving, it doesn't really matter, I think very quiet sort of thing to do at night. Or is it something else during peak times? It would be I think that would be really interesting. And then folding in Crystal, because from Crystal's research, then you have a possibility to say, well, how do people feel about that? Is that something they're motivated towards? And do they care about that? And how do they make a shared decision about what's a priority there? So I think that's where maybe the power comes in again. It's I was really struck also at your slide where you looked at the different cultural characteristics. You had Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Steve, and Mrs. Yoko, right? And Mr. Steve, I don't know if these are real or made up, but like the Swedish guy was interested in energy, and the American woman was interested in money. These are great cultural stereotypes. And the Japanese woman was more interested in the resilience and the safety of the network, I guess. Is that right? Yeah.
Right.
So I think that this is where your research, I think, digs into the detail of people, and they're not all the same. And how do they decide about these things?
I think building in accountability and transparency into these networks is really powerful as a way of building in community participation. I guess, this is well known in the literature and research that people become very cynical, right? That's why they don't show up. They don't participate because they think they're serving an interest that isn't theirs, and they're getting sold a bad deal. And I think being able to demonstrate, as in the way that you have, is really, really powerful. And that creates power, right? Like when I talk about power in politics, I'm not just talking about like the macro, the obvious. It's all about the small scale. And the transforming behavior is about being able to tell a story and to demonstrate the value of that story in relationship with communities. Because I think one of the things we tend to do is we try to there's a whole body of research on like nudge theory, like how do we nudge people to make better decisions, right? And I mean, there's something in that, but I reckon we can do things a little bit differently as well with communities to kind of build a muscle, build a confidence in what is possible. And I think for everyday folk, they don't have the bandwidth to think about it, right? And that's one of the challenges.
But Daisuke, did you building on this, did you look at shared energy, or rather, how does the community decide what energy to put in? Because I know that, I guess you you installed the solar cells and the battery as in this test case in Okinawa. But the nice thing about this tech, linking to something Yuichiro, I think, said, is this adaptable or adaptive idea that you can change it over time. And it's relatively straightforward because it's just a solar cell. And as those things get cheaper and easier, it's kind of like plugging in. You know, it's like just putting another plug point in. It's almost like DIY, I guess, to build on Yuichiro's point. Did you look at how the community would think about the decisions about that? So if I decide to put another solar cell on my roof as an individual, but I'm linked to you in my street, did you look at the kind of shared decision-making about that? As in, to Crystal's point, do I talk to you about that? Do you talk to me about that? Do you contribute extra money? Do I, you know, or do we not use money at all? I mean, yeah.
Current system is completely working, operating automatically. Yeah, so if there are enough energy, the software judge and they control the energy to share the share the energy to other one.
Yeah.
But for our plan, we thought about the emergency or disaster case, and if there is some facility for the emergency disaster case, people people to go in such kind of cases, to make the high priority to that facility. That is, that for the emergency case, we thought about the priority, but for how to say usual case or normal case, that's the next, how to say, our next challenge.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm interested that you said about if you make a small scale of the system, people will be more, how to say, involved or motivated. Yeah.
Yeah, they could. I think they could be. That's the possibility. And I know this is where it links to Yuichiro's interests as well, of course. So there's something very interesting about those things also coming into play, so that like Yuichiro's thinking, or mine, I guess, around this kind of DIY urbanism and tactical stuff. It's not just applying to the parklets and the simple things like I like this old shrine or something like that, but it could also be about how do we make energy together as a neighborhood, or how many cars do we need as a neighborhood? And maybe we can just, you know, if the 5 of us live in a neighborhood together, we just need 1 car perhaps. So, and that can kind of work because software enables us to see that, okay, Yuichiro needs it on Saturday, Crystal needs it on Sunday, Daisuke needs it on Monday, you know, I don't need it ever because I can't drive. But it's, you know, so like that becomes something that we can navigate at that scale, as opposed to us having 5 cars each just in case, or 5 cars between all of us rather. So the scale suddenly brings things into the world of participatory or tactical urbanism around quite big infrastructures, interestingly. So
yeah, it's very interesting to me. You know, like we work in the same company, but I never thought that there would be a connection between like what Daisuke is doing and what I'm doing. But there seems to be a lot of like a shared interest here. Like how do we can negotiate between like people with different interests, and if we're using an algorithm for the negotiation, how can we make the algorithm appear like equitable and like fair to the participants? And there seems to be a lot of like you know, like a points for collaboration here.
Yeah, there's definitely something in this overlap between energy and mobility, and then bringing participation into it. And I think I know we're nearly out of time, but I think Crystal's key point about the promise here is really important, because that's to do with trust, I guess. So trust in the systems. And that's why I was so fascinated, Daisuke, by you visualizing the system at work, you know, that you exposing the transparency of the way that the energy is moving around. Therefore, immediately ask the question, like, why is it moving around like that? Who's deciding that? And it's, I guess, the software is deciding based on an idea of optimized use and resilience and so on. But that's then if I know that and I can read it, then I trust it, or I stand a greater chance of trusting it because I can at least see the way the decision is being made and I feel I can be part of that. And then of course there's a deeper level of trust is, could I suggest another way of doing it? Or maybe there's an old lady that lives around the corner and she should always have energy, no matter even if there's no energy in my system. I always want to make sure that she has it just in case, and that's something the software might not decide, but me as a human, knowing another human, might make that decision. And so there's these two levels of trust, I guess. I don't know if you think this is valid, but it's do I understand why decisions are being made? And that applies to mobility or energy or anything else. And then can I change that? Or can I suggest an iteration of it of some kind? Would that be a way of articulating promise towards trust?
Yeah, absolutely. Is trust in the systems that we are participating within, trust in those that are leading us in those practices. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Trust is pretty powerful, I think.
So that the kind of research that we do on the participatory urbanism side, which Yuichiro, as you said, I'm so happy we can bring you together. That's our role. I think that would be a really interesting overlay then onto the Daisuke Majid world of energy and mobility. As you pointed out, Kotaro, and you also found that interesting. So look, it's 3:30 in Melbourne. I guess it's, 1:30 in Kyoto or something in Tokyo. So yes, I think we're at the end of our session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Sony colleagues.
Awesome.
It was really pleasure and super interesting to hear your work, and I'll say thanks on behalf of Majid as well, because I know he wants to say that. What will happen now is that we'll create a document where we jot down a few of these thoughts. So the idea of energy mobility plus participatory and questions of trust and transparency and so on applied to these infrastructures. And then we'll see if we can work that together into a shared area of interest in some way. And then we'll see what we can do after that point. So please get in touch if you have any further thoughts. You have my email or Yuichiro's email. We're doing the third session tomorrow, which will be about also distributed systems, but I think more to do with food. So we'll let you know how that goes. And I think that's it. Thank you once again.
Yeah, thank
you very much.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
It's nice to talk to you.
You too. Take care.